The sun was bleeding out across the Texas horizon when I saw the lights, red and blue slicing through the dust like warning flares. 3 squad cars idled across my gate, engines humming, silhouettes sharp against the gold sky. And there she was, Karen Whitmore, arms folded, chin high, grin so smug it could curdle milk. I'd been gone 4 months, Washington, D.C., briefings and policy meetings, long corridors that smelled like cold marble and stale coffee. And now I was coming home to White Hawk Ranch with a horse trailer rattling behind me, tires humming on gravel I could have driven blind. I expected the usual, Buck Henley waving me in, cattle lowing in the back pasture, the porch light already on. Instead, I got Karen bouncing on her toes behind a wall of law enforcement like she'd just called an airstrike. The nearest deputy stepped forward, hat in hand. He didn't meet my eyes. "Sir, we've had a trespassing complaint. This lady says you don't belong here." I cut the engine. Diesel rattles faded, leaving nothing but the chirp of crickets and the restless stamp of my mare in the trailer. My gaze drifted past the deputy to the iron sign at the gate. White Hawk Ranch, IST 1887, letters black against the dying light. Then back to the stranger who'd moved in down the road 3 months ago and decided she ran the county. The look on Karen's face was pure victory, as though a century of cattle, sweat, and stubborn Texas soil meant nothing compared to her shiny clipboard and manicured nails. "Officer," I said, calm as Sunday morning, "meet the woman who just tried to evict the guy who oversees every HOA in 5 states. Her smile faltered. Not much, just a twitch at the corner, but enough to tell me I'd landed the first punch. "Before I go further, you need to understand something about this land. My father died here in March. I buried him beneath live oaks whose roots run deeper than fence posts. This soil has been plowed by White Hawk hands since the day Sam Houston's statue was still warm from the foundry. The ranch, 2,400 acres of mesquite and rolling hills, wasn't just home. It was blood, history, and livelihood bound together by barbed wire and grit. And while I'd been running cattle, I'd also been climbing ladders in the Federal Housing Administration. For months ago, I'd traded boots for polished shoes long enough to become Regional Oversight Director, the man who makes sure homeowners associations follow the law. Karen Whitmore had no idea she'd picked the wrong neighbor. She wasn't subtle about it either. Even before I got back, Buck called me from Scratchy Cell Service. "Boss, you won't believe this lady. She's out here measuring dust clouds with some fancy meter like she's EPA. She logged every moo, every truck delivery, every sunrise feed time like it was evidence in a federal case. 17 complaint letters were waiting for me when I came home, stacked neat on the porch like bales of hay, each one stamped with her self-appointed title, Community Standards Advocate, Sagebrush Estates. That subdivision was supposed to be authentic Western living. What it really meant was California money, buying postage stamp lots next to real cowboys, and then panicking when the countryside smelled like the countryside. Karen, age 48, fresh from an HOA meltdown in San Diego, was a one-woman code enforcement squad. According to Buck, she cruised by our fence twice a day in her SUV with a clipboard on the dash, photographing cattle like they were criminal suspects. Now, she'd escalated to calling the sheriff on me. The deputy shifted his weight like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sir, can I see some ID?" I passed him my license and let him read the name. "Garrett White Hawk." He glanced back at the gate sign, scratched his chin, then looked at Karen, who was still smiling like she'd already won. "Appreciate your time, deputy," I said, stepping down from the truck. My boots hit gravel with a crunch. The air smelled of sage and distant rain. "But I think you'll find I belong here more than anyone." Karen's smirk cracked again, and that's when I knew this wasn't going to be some neighborhood squabble. This was going to be a war, and I had every intention of winning. By morning, the gravel road told the whole story. Fresh tire tracks cut across the ditch where Karen had parked her SUV last night to watch the ranch gate. Buck Henley leaned against a fence post, coffee in one hand, expression sour as unripe persimmons. "She was out here till near midnight," he said, nodding toward the empty thermos on his truck hood. "Camera with a zoom lens. Might as well hang a sign that says professional busybody at work. I took the cup he offered, still hot enough to bite. The cattle were restless in the upper pasture, snorting steam into the cool air. 4 generations of Whitehawks had run herds down that same road. Now one woman with too much free time thought she could shut it down. You think she's doing this for fun? Buck asked. Or is she just plain mean? Both, I said. But mostly, she needs to prove she's important. The truth was uglier. Karen's complaints weren't just letters anymore. They were accusations dressed up in legal threats. Noise violations, odor complaints, unsafe access roads. She'd even claimed our feeding schedule was disruptive to community harmony, as if cattle should wait for her brunch plans before eating. 2 days after the sheriff incident, a courier dropped off an envelope thick with legal stationery. Karen's first salvo from an Austin law firm. Their letter demanded we cease all incompatible agricultural activities within 200 yards of her property. Translation: stop ranching on the land my family had worked since 1887. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I called Sarah Olivia, the sharpest attorney I knew, and someone who understood rural law like she was born to it. By dusk, she'd already pulled the ranch title records and confirmed what my grandfather taught me years ago over bourbon and barbed wire. Agricultural easements don't die. Our right to operate here was bulletproof. Karen didn't know it yet, but every complaint she filed was nailing her own legal coffin shut. Still, it grated. Watching someone treat your history like a zoning violation has a way of crawling under your skin. That night, I sat on the porch swing with a glass of rye and the smell of rain rolling in. The horizon flashed with heat lightning, and I could almost hear my father's voice. Don't wrestle the hog in the mud, son. Just let it wear itself out. Good advice. But I've never been much for waiting. The next morning, Karen made her boldest move yet. I caught her on Buck's security cameras, standing on a ladder, leaning over our fence with a surveyor's rod, measuring the height of our gates like she was auditing an airport runway. One of our heifers wandered over, curious as a child, and Karen nearly toppled backward in panic. Boss, you're going to want to see this, Buck said, chuckling as he replayed the footage. This woman's writing a dissertation on cow pies. The problem wasn't just her. She was recruiting allies. A retired banker named Bryce Kellerman and a former Phoenix City Councilwoman named Donna Hutchkins had joined her Property Values Committee. They met at Karen's kitchen table with matching folders and a slideshow titled Agricultural Operations Impact Assessment. Impact Assessment. On cows. I'd seen less paperwork at congressional hearings. They planned to present their case at a county compatibility hearing. The goal was simple: make our family ranch look like a public menace. What Karen didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I'd spent 4 months in Washington learning how to dismantle crooked HOAs brick by brick. My federal job wasn't about ranch inspections. It was about holding community associations accountable when they trampled the law. And Sagebrush Estates? Oh, they had skeletons rattling in the walls. While Karen counted cow patties, I quietly started counting her violations. Sarah Olivia dug into permit records. Marcus Webb, the county planning director and my dad's old fishing buddy, pulled dusty files showing that subdivision approval came with strict environmental obligations. Sound barriers, drainage buffers, easements they'd never honored. Every letter Karen sent, every photo she snapped, every lawyer's threat she paid for. All of it was building my case. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to block roads or shout at meetings. All I had to do was keep running cattle like we'd always done and wait for Karen to trip over her own ambition. But Buck was right about one thing. Karen had the energy of a caffeinated chihuahua and twice the bite. And even the most harmless dog can make a mess if you let it run wild too long. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The county hearing was still 3 weeks away when Karen decided to change tactics. Up until then, she'd been irritating. Obsessive letters, staged photos, and a Facebook page full of blurry cattle pictures captioned like crime scene evidence. Annoying? Sure. Dangerous? Not really. Then one evening, Buck called, his voice tight as a stretched wire. Boss, she blocked the feed truck. Right at the subdivision entrance. Wouldn't let Miguel through till he opened the trailer, so she could inspect the cargo. Says she's documenting hazardous materials. Hazardous materials. It was hay. Alfalfa, so clean you could eat it off the bale. By the time I got there, the deputy was already untangling the mess, Karen shouting about toxic dust, while Miguel stood in the cab, arms folded, refusing to unload a single flake. The sheriff gave her a warning. She gave me a look I won't forget. Not anger, not even hatred. Something colder. Determination without reason. That night, I didn't sit on the porch with bourbon. I paced. For the first time, I wondered if she was unstable, and that made her dangerous. The next morning, Sarah Olivia laid out fresh evidence on her oak conference table. Karen had filed 3 more complaints overnight to animal control, the IRS, and even the state veterinarian. Claims of animal abuse, tax fraud, illegal dumping. Garrett, she's crossing a line, Sarah said. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is character assassination. Good, I said, though it didn't feel good. The more she files, the more proof we have when this hits court. Sarah frowned. I'm serious. People like her don't stop until someone makes them stop. Restraining orders on the table if you're ready. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe some stubborn part of me wanted to win without paperwork, without dragging a neighbor through court. I'd been raised to handle problems face to face, not with signatures and stamped envelopes. But that old-fashioned pride started to feel a lot like foolishness. 2 nights later, Buck's cameras caught something I couldn't laugh off. Karen, parked on the gravel road at 2 a.m., leaning across her hood with a telephoto lens, photographing the ranch house. Not cattle, not fences, the windows where my family slept. I froze watching the footage, coffee cooling in my hand. My gut twisted, not with anger, but with something sharper. Fear. This wasn't about property lines anymore. This was personal. At dawn, I drove into Millfield, past feed stores and old brick storefronts that smelled of dust and history. Folks waved as I passed. People who knew my father, my grandfather, men who'd bled to keep this land alive. I wondered what they'd think if they knew a woman from California was circling my ranch like a vulture. I stopped at Rita's Diner. The usual crowd of ranchers nursed black coffee and biscuits, but the room went quiet when I walked in. News travels fast in a town where cattle outnumber people. You gonna let that woman push you around, Garrett? Marty Kowalski called from the counter. I forced a smile, not planning on it. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, this wasn't about proving Karen wrong. It wasn't even about winning at the hearing. It was about protecting my family and showing every neighbor in Millfield that we don't roll over when someone tries to tear out our roots. That afternoon, I called Sarah. File the restraining order. Start the paperwork. And while you're at it, dig deeper into Sagebrush Estates. I want every permit, every inspection, every dollar that ever touched that HOA. Sarah's voice sharpened. What changed? I stared out at the hills, sun low and fierce over the mesquite. She's not just after the ranch anymore. She's after me. 3 days later, I got the call that turned irritation into open war. Jake Morrison, Channel 7's investigative reporter, wanted to talk. Not about the ranch, about Karen. Seems he'd been digging through old lawsuits in San Diego and Phoenix. Seems our neighbor wasn't just a nuisance. She was a professional one. Mr. Whitehawk, Morrison said, voice crackling over the line, you might want to see what I've uncovered. This isn't her first rodeo. And just like that, the ground shifted under all of us. When we met at Rita's Diner, back booth, blinds half drawn, he laid out a manila folder thick with paper and thicker with trouble. Lawsuits, restraining orders, HOA board minutes from 3 states. Karen Whitmore had left a trail wider than a cattle drive. She's done this before, Morrison said, tapping the stack. San Diego, Phoenix, even Albuquerque. Same pattern. Moves in, declares herself queen of compliance, terrorizes neighbors until they break or leave. Only difference is, he looked at me over his coffee. You're not leaving. No, I said. I'm not. But the weight of it pressed in. Karen wasn't just a busybody with a clipboard. She was a storm that chewed up communities and spat them out. And now she'd picked my family's land as her battlefield. Sarah Olivia's voice over the phone that night carried a rare edge of worry. Garrett, She's escalating fast. We got her stalking pattern documented. The restraining order hearing's next week, but I'm telling you, she's not going to back off. I know. I stared out the yard. Porch light throwing long shadows across the gravel. She's too far in. Pride's got her by the throat. Pride gets people hurt, Sarah said softly. You've got to be ready for anything. Anything. I thought about my father's funeral just months before, about the old men in starched hats shaking my hand and saying keep the land strong. I thought about Sarah's warning, and how much easier it was to protect cattle from coyotes than your own family from a neighbor who wouldn't quit. The next blow came at the county planning office. Marcus Webb called me in, his voice low, urgent. Garrett, you're not going to believe this. Karen's pushing for emergency action against the ranch, trying to shut you down before the hearing. She's got her committee lined up and a slideshow about dust levels and manure runoff. I raised an eyebrow. Manure runoff? Marcus, you've been out here. You know we grade those pens twice a week. Doesn't matter. She's convincing people who've never stepped off pavement. But here's the kicker, he slid a document across the table. Your subdivision neighbors? They're sitting on a pile of permit violations. No sound barriers. No buffer zone. HOA didn't finish half the compliance work they were supposed to. The irony burned like cheap whiskey. Karen had spent months documenting our ranch operations, and all she'd really done was spotlight her own community's failures. Still, victory didn't feel close. Not yet. That night, I found Karen's SUV parked half a mile down our fence line, headlights off, engine running cold. Watching, waiting. I drove past without stopping, jaw tight. For the first time in years, I felt anger so sharp it scared me. Not because I couldn't handle her, but because I wanted to. The next morning, Buck cornered me by the feed bins, arms crossed. Boss, I've worked this ranch 40 years. Seen droughts, seen floods, seen banks try to take your daddy's land. But I ain't never seen anything like this woman. What's your plan? I took a slow breath. We fight her with facts. We'll let her dig her own hole. And if she doesn't stop digging, I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know. 3 days later, the hearing notice arrived, and so did a formal complaint from Karen's lawyers demanding $340,000 in ranch modifications. Screens for equipment. Relocated roads. Sound barriers for livestock. Sarah read it twice, then tossed it on the table like spoiled meat. She's not just after you. She's trying to bleed you dry. Then we don't give her a drop, I said. Marcus will testify. You got the title records. And Morrison's ready to air his piece any day now. Sarah looked at me hard. Garrett, this isn't just legal anymore. It's personal. You ready for that? I thought of Karen leaning over her hood in the dark, camera aimed at my windows. I thought of my father's voice telling me to stay calm. Yeah, I said finally. I'm ready. But in the silence after she hung up, I wondered if I was lying to both of us. The Millfield County Courthouse smelled of old wood and tension. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, doing nothing to cool the heat packed into that narrow hearing room. Every seat was taken. Ranchers in pressed jeans, subdivision neighbors in starch polo shirts, reporters with cameras humming like hornets. Karen sat at the front table, chin high, folder thick with printouts and photos. To anyone else, she looked confident. But I saw it. The twitch in her hands, the way her eyes darted whenever Jake Morrison's camera crew shifted angles. She wasn't here to win. She was here to survive. The county commissioner called the hearing to order. We're here to discuss compatibility complaints regarding White Hawk Ranch operations. His voice was steady, but the weight behind it told the truth. Everyone already knew this wasn't just another zoning squabble. Karen stood first. Her voice rang sharp, rehearsed. This ranch has created unsafe conditions, diminished property values, and violated community standards. I have proof. She flipped through slides, dust clouds at sunrise, a feeding truck at 6 a.m., cattle bunched along the fence line like prisoners in a yard. Every photo framed like evidence of a crime that didn't exist. When she finished, the room buzzed with uneasy murmurs. It was my turn. I walked up slow, boots echoing on the tile. No slideshow, no music, just a folder under my arm and Sarah Olivia at my side, calm as a coiled rope. Commissioner, I said, voice even, This ranch has been here since 1887. These operations predate every house in Sagebrush Estates by more than a century. What Mrs. Whitmore calls violations are the sound of Texas doing what it's done for generations. Sarah laid out the documents, agricultural easements, historical records, county maps, and Marcus Webb stepped forward with his own statement. This subdivision was approved with a 200-foot agricultural buffer that was never built. Their HOA is in violation of multiple development permits. The room shifted. Neighbors leaned forward. Karen froze. Then Morrison spoke up from the back, camera still rolling. "Commissioner, I've reviewed Mrs. Whitmore's litigation history in 3 other states. This isn't her first conflict with neighbors." Gasps broke out like sparks from dry brush. Karen's face went pale, and her voice cut through the noise, shrill, desperate. "This is harassment. He's using his federal position to intimidate us." I looked her dead in the eye. "Mrs. Whitmore, I haven't made a single call from Washington. But if you'd like me to, I can." The silence was thunder. Sarah handed over Buck's security footage. Karen measuring fences at dawn, photographing cattle through slats, blocking supply trucks. Evidence of stalking, not farming violations. The deputy who'd once met me in my own gate testified about repeated false complaints. And then came the blow that knocked the air out of the room. Sarah produced the permit records showing Karen's house itself violated setback requirements, built 50 feet from our property line when regulations required 200. The commissioner didn't even have to speak. The truth was on paper. Karen's committee allies shifted uncomfortably. Bryce Kellerman stared at the floor. Donna Hutchkins slid out of the room altogether. "This hearing's concluded," the commissioner said finally. "White Hawk Ranch operations are fully protected under law. Further harassment will result in legal action." But Karen wasn't done. As I stepped into the hallway, she lunged, voice cracking, face twisted. "You think you won? You think you can destroy me?" Deputies moved fast, holding her back as she screamed. "You ruined my life." "No," I said quietly. "You did." The cameras caught everything. Her shouting, the deputies cuffing her after she violated the restraining order right there on courthouse steps. Within hours, Morrison's footage hit the airwaves. Neighbor Harris's Century Rancher ends in arrest. That night, under a Texas sky burning purple and gold, I sat on the porch swing with Sarah Olivia beside me, her hand brushing mine. For the first time in months, the ranch was quiet. No headlights on the road, no cameras in the dark. Just cattle settling for the night. Cicadas humming in the mesquite. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like something harder. A truth my father would have understood. Sometimes you don't beat a bully. You just let them destroy themselves. 6 months later, the gravel road to White Hawk Ranch was quiet again. No SUVs idling at midnight. No cameras peering through the fence. Just the sound of wind combing the grass and the soft lowing of cattle settling under an orange dusk. Karen Whitmore's name had become a kind of cautionary tale in Millfield County. The neighbor who declared war on a century-old ranch and lost everything. After her arrest outside the courthouse, the restraining order became permanent. Criminal stalking charges stuck. Her HOA, drowning under compliance costs they could no longer ignore, voted her out in a single meeting that lasted all of 12 minutes. By the time the bank posted foreclosure notices on her house, even her closest allies had vanished like dust in a high wind. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. Somewhere along the way, the fight stopped being about Karen at all. The ranch had changed. We'd hosted school tours, set up a scholarship fund in my father's name, and opened our gates for a heritage day where kids learned how to rope, brand, and bottle feed calves. People drove in from 3 counties just to taste barbecue under the old live oaks and hear fiddle music cut through the evening air. When the state agriculture department recognized White Hawk Ranch as a century heritage farm, Buck Henley stood a little taller. He'd worked this land longer than I'd been alive. Watching him accept that plaque with calloused hands and watery eyes reminded me why we'd fought so hard to keep things right. And Washington had noticed too. My testimony before the House Subcommittee on HOA Accountability turned our local fight into something bigger. New rules now protect family farms from harassment nationwide. stronger disclosure laws, funding for agricultural easements, real teeth against HOAs that think they can bully the past out of existence. Karen never meant to make history, but she did. The irony? Buried in the subdivision's purchase records, her signature acknowledged the agricultural easements she'd spent months pretending didn't exist. In the end, she'd been fighting the very thing she'd agreed to live beside. I sometimes wonder what she thinks about now, if she thinks about any of it at all. Last I heard, she moved out of state, leaving behind a half-built life and unpaid legal fees. Her husband filed for divorce. Her adult children stopped taking calls. There's no satisfaction in seeing someone unravel, even when they tried their best to unravel you. Late one evening, after the last of the Heritage Day crowd left and the hills were glowing purple in the dying light, Sarah Olivia sat with me on the porch swing. We watched the kids, our two fostered-adopt boys, chase each other through the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The land felt alive again, not because we'd beaten someone, but because we hadn't let them strip it of its soul. Worth it? Sarah asked softly. I thought of Karen's SUV on the roadside at 2 a.m., her camera pointed at our windows. I thought of my father's voice, steady as a fence post, telling me never to wrestle the hog in the mud. And I thought of this porch, these hills, this home that would still be here long after the Karens of the world had burned themselves out. Yeah, I said. Worth it. The cicadas started up in the mesquite. The wind shifted, carrying the clean, honest smell of cattle and hay. Somewhere out in the back pasture, a calf called for its mother, the same sound my grandfather heard, and his father before him. Land remembers. It remembers who tends it and who tries to take it. It remembers storms and droughts, and every footstep of the people stubborn enough to stay. As the sun dropped and the first stars came out, I realized something. This fight wasn't about law or money or even pride. It was about belonging. Karen had tried to rewrite the story of a place she'd never understood. But some stories are older than fences, older than houses, older than people like her who come and go. And if you're lucky enough to inherit one of those stories, your job isn't to change it. It's to carry it forward.